When it all goes horribly wrong, I sit down. I think for me, I'm such a list maker. It's really about what's gone wrong and why, but more importantly, what are we going to do about it? And we're going to do it quick.
Power to Live More with Joe Dobbs.
Welcome to the Power to Live More podcast, all about productivity, organisation, well-being, energy and resilience. I'm Jo Dodds, and I started this show to enable interesting people to share their stories about how they use their power to live more, and by that I mean to do the stuff that they want to do more than the stuff that they need to or should do. It's about creating a life for yourself where you have the energy, health and space to be happy and fulfilled, spending your time as you'd like, whether that be at work, home or somewhere else entirely. That's your choice.
Hello. My name is Ellie Dodds and I am co-presenter, and today Jo is interviewing Susan Moore. Susan was introduced to us by Paula Gardner of show number 2 and number 65. Susan is the founder of More Business and leads a team of virtual assistants providing online business support to clients across the world. Susan and her team help clients transition to online business models and provide a full range of back-office services so that clients can concentrate on what they do best. Susan was winner of the Outstanding VA of the Year Award 2008. Back to the studio.
Today I'm interviewing Susan Moore of More Business. Welcome, Susan. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, Jo.
So start by telling us a bit about who you are, what you do, and crucially, where you do it.
My name's Susan Moore. My business is More Business. We provide back office support to entrepreneurs and non-exec directors, generally people who have portfolio careers. We are actually pioneers of working from home, having done it for 14 years. So the whole team work from our own offices across the UK, Europe and North America.
Wow. So it's interesting. When we were talking before we came on, in fact, we were talking so long, I thought we were going to run out of time to do the podcast. What I found interesting is, so now you said 14 years, that sort of makes a lot of sense in terms of we've got quite a lot of mutual connections because we've both been in business pretty much the same amount of time. And we were saying how funny it is that we don't think we've ever spoken. We think we might have known each other for a while, but we certainly have lots of mutual connections.
So many.
Great to hear about the whole working from home for that length of time, and also, as you say, sort of working globally and working with a team. How did that all come about?
I was a travelling EA because I worked for an airline, a Ukrainian airline. Prior to that, I'd worked in investment in the city of London and in Sydney, but I'd always travelled with my work for conferences, part organisation, partly to be there as another face, another ambassador for the business. And the airline that I was working for was due, the joint venture was due to come to an end. And I think I was in JFK in an aircraft hangar in a blizzard. And I was there from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. With about 3 slices of pizza. And anyone who knows me would know that would have killed me not to have eaten. I was cold. And I thought, do you know what? I've left a 3 and a 4-year-old at home. I've missed their nativity, which, by the way, 15 years on, they've never let me forget. And I thought, there's got to be another way. I love traveling in terms of my personal life, but the glamour of doing it for business had worn off, definitely. So I decided that with the advent of broadband out into the rural area that I'd moved to, that I would set up for myself as at what was then More VA originally.
So that was fairly pioneering, as we've sort of implied at the beginning. What made you think you could do it?
It was an article in Red magazine, and I'd seen somebody else who'd done it. It was literally a couple of months before, and I think without the advent of a decent broadband, I think it would have been really tricky.
Yeah.
But I decided to try it out, knowing that the joint venture was coming to an end. So I then sort of told a few people about it, and the airline actually became my first client during the transition period that they were going through. And then my former boss, who had set up his own hedge fund, became my second client.
Yeah.
So I think I was very, very fortunate in that, within the first few weeks of setting up, I had 2 good sized businesses. And I think psychologically that really helped me to tell my story and make the transition psychologically from working in corporate to being a business owner.
Well, I have a proposition for you, which we'll discuss later. But guess what? I started my business 15 years ago because of an article I read in Red magazine. I think that might be a story for them. Do you not think?
I think it would be a really good story for them. Don't tell anyone.
No, so we'll come back to that later. Great that you could turn, your existing contacts into clients and get started so soon and everything else. How did you sort of take away that wanderlust that presumably you had? You said you'd worked abroad, you travelled, and now you were at home in a rural area at the end of the internet when most people didn't do that. I mean, we've laughed in sort of lockdown cried and everything else, how people have had to sort of overnight get used to the whole concept of working differently and working remotely and everything else. You hadn't just moved from one office to another by the sound of it. You really quite dramatically changed your life. How did that all go?
I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. I think I really, really miss the social side of being in an office with lots of very bright people who you might not ordinarily mix with socially. I think that was the hardest thing to deal with. So in terms of the actual business itself and the nuts and bolts of it, that was fine. And you've obviously got the expertise of being an exec assistant. Regarding the travel, I'm lucky enough still to travel with some of my clients because I arrange conferences for them and I scout locations for them. So that's my favourite part of my job. But I don't miss the commute and having to go into London 5 days a week from a rural area with pretty rotten train and road connections.
No, I can see that. We were talking, weren't we, earlier about a mutual connection where you told me roughly where you lived. I always think it's funny. Over the years, I've worked with national retailers and I've travelled a lot around the country. I always say that I think I've slept in most service station car parks. And normally when I meet people, I remember going to the Lake District once and we were having a drink in a pub after our walk, and there was a whole group of people who'd all got together. They were university friends or something, and they were all from different parts of the country. And every time someone said where they came from, I had some story or some connection or something that would connect to it. And so whenever people sort of give me a general bit of where they are, I always want to know the detail, just in case I've got a connection and we've discovered a mutual friend who lives about 5 minutes from you.
Exactly. And usually I give people a very big overview of where it is because they only know Stansted Airport and not all of the little winding roads and villages. So it's amazing.
Yeah. So tell us about how you sort of develop the business. You've mentioned that you've got a team working, around the world and in other places in the world. How did that all start from you in your office in the middle of nowhere?
That started because I very quickly realised that I was going to have to delegate, and seeing as I am the poster girl for delegation and spend my life telling other people to do it, I thought I'd better walk the walk because with the 2 big clients I had right at the beginning, they were joined by a bloodstock agent up in Newmarket. And it quickly became apparent that, you've got to separate working for your clients and working on the business if you want it to grow and not just stay as a one-man band. And I think I there was a VA conference, and I was originally set up as more VA, and we were purely secretarial, PA, admin backup. But as our clients have grown, they asked us to take on more and more as the point person. So I was at a VA conference, met a couple of people there, and then also recruited from among the ranks of PAs and exec assistants that I'd worked with in the city and through my other connections. So one of my colleagues, or rather associates, very early on was PA to my brother in Canada. My poor brother had his ears melted over the first year about what a virtual assistant does. And his PA came in one day and said, "I've decided to become a VA. Do you know what that is?" And my brother said, "Yeah, only too well." So he introduced us, and she's still with me. She's sort of one of the Canadian team.
Wow.
So I think it's just really all about communication. It's communication with your clients and communication with your team.
Yes, yeah. And let's talk a bit about how you work with people. Well, firstly, how you work with people and how that might have changed over the time. I remember, back in the days when we were sort of both starting our businesses, I was helping a local VA with her search engine optimization on her website. And I remember having a conversation with her of saying there is no point trying to rank for the term virtual assistant because nobody's searching for it. People are searching for secretary and telephonist and typist and administration assistant and loads of other words at the moment, but they're not typing for VA at the moment because it was such a new way of describing what you were doing. I think most people know what VAs are now, but still many people don't use them, and I think sometimes it's because they don't know what they can do with them and how it can possibly work when it's somebody else. They're not based where you are. You need systems and processes for that to sort of work, and people don't know how to do that. So tell us a bit about how that works, how you work with people, how you sort of transition people from not knowing they need help but not knowing how they can make that happen into what works for them.
That's a great question, actually. I think with the virtual assistant term, I spent probably the first 8 years explaining it to people. I don't have to do that anymore. No. So that's really, that's great relief. In terms of how we work with people, when they first come to us, it's generally, as you say, they know that they need help. Quite often they're so overwhelmed that they can't quite work out what it is. So what we do is talk to them about what's most important. And because most of our clients, I would say, are in a professional service role, they will have several strings to their bow. So typically they have left corporate and set up their own consultancy or coaching business. And they, as well as doing what they do, their own expertise, they might be writing a book, writing articles, speaking as in terms of public speaking. And it's then that we ask them, what are your priorities? So it's helpful for us to know what their strategy is, or certainly what their priorities are for the next coming year. Because if we can understand that, then we can help them to work towards what they really need to achieve. So there's kind of two parts to it. There's being able to take on all the admin for our clients, but there's also having a mindset that is this what you really need to be doing? Is this what you need to be focused on? So if somebody's working on, I don't know, a new email marketing campaign that's around about a new coaching course, for example, we will work with them on that, and then we'll take off their hands what we can so that they can focus on whether it's the content, and we do the social media schedules, the email marketing campaign, or simply act as a point person for other stakeholders, for clients, that kind of thing. And what we also ask them for is an idea of who their most important connections are, so who their stakeholders are, so that we can speak to them, we can be in touch with them by email, and hopefully free up a lot of time for our clients. We basically say that we give them 8 days a week.
Wow. So, I was going to say it's a good strapline. I think that sounds like a good song, but that wasn't the song, was it?
I think someone might have done that already. Damn.
So how do you work with your team? What do your days look like?
With my team, what we do is we try to match our team, our VAs, to the clients. So if they've got expertise in a particular market sector or they've got skills around about, I don't know, writing, social media, that kind of thing, we match them to the client, and then there will be two of us who work with the client. So it's the lead VA and a backup. And then what my days look like are I've got just a couple of clients that I work with, and the rest of it is spent in managing the business. So it's communicating, having a weekly meeting with the team so that we can be clear who's doing what. We can share best practice, because obviously I think with software, I don't know if it's a COVID thing, but everything seems to have changed in the last few months. So it's making sure that we are up to date with software, sharing connections sometimes. I mean, we also open our black book for our clients. So if one client is looking for someone to take on something that's outside of our expertise, we also, we can introduce them. And then in terms of the team, it's just about managing the projects and tasks, and making sure that we are meeting targets, meeting deadlines.
Mm-hmm. And how do you manage your sort of office time on the basis that you've got a global company supporting global people, and therefore presumably people in most time zones at some stage or another?
Yeah, we said that
working 24/7.
You have to be really, really firm with yourself, because I think it's very much a support thing in that you can wear yourself to a frazzle. So what I tend to do is work early in the morning with those people who are based in mainland Europe and the UK. I tend to have a bit of a lull around about the middle of the day, so I then do my own sales, marketing, social media scheduling, that kind of thing, talk to my VAs. And then again, because the west coast of the US is up there are a couple of clients I work with there, from about 3 p.m. they tend to be back online, and I will watch emails until about 7. Or if there's something, if there's something pressing going on, that I need to be keeping an eye out, I will stay until 8 p.m, 9 p.m. But that tends to be, I tend to know about it, and it's probably for about 4 weeks a year, when clients are doing things like investor roadshows. So that's sort of moving pieces all the time, and I just keep an eye on things to make sure that they are where they're supposed to be. Yeah.
So very much about being sort of flexible, but taking the time back at different times as well.
Definitely, yeah, that's definitely how I describe it. And we are also on the lookout for Australia and New Zealand based team members as well, because they've gone off, basically they went off traveling, and I think we need to get some more people in to cover those time zones. I've
been working through the sort of COVID time with students in Australia and colleagues in Australia as well, and I just keep sort of being pleased with the fact that I am such a night bird, because we have meetings at like 11 o'clock at night, which suits me fine, but wouldn't suit the average person. But that sort of time zone is just, we were trying to work out a call today that would suit England, America and Australia.
Oh no.
I came out with about 9 o'clock in the UK, I think, just about, because somebody else is in China as well, just to confuse matters, but we don't care about him, he's just going to have to get up really early.
That is the hardest I find with Australia, US and UK. I have to do that regularly. It's the hardest combination.
Yeah.
But actually I'm really lucky, because I'm like you, I'm a night bird, so I'm very happy midnight, 1 o'clock. One of my team members gets up at 5 a.m, which I will never do in my life. So she usually does it and goes to the gym for 6. But I know that she's got eyes on what's going on very early in the morning as well, which it gives me also the security of knowing that, we're keeping an eye on what's going on.
Yes, that's good. I always laugh. One of my best friends lives opposite, and she's the opposite to me. So I'm up late at night and lying in the morning. She's always sending me texts at like 7:30 going, if you're up, do you fancy a coffee? It's like, yeah, right, I'm not going to be. And I'll want to see her for a glass of wine in the evening, and it's like 9 o'clock and she's already asleep. It's mutually not very compatible.
No, it's going to have to be lunch.
Exactly. When it works, but there you go. And so let's talk tools and apps. As the organization that you are, I guess that they're really key for you, particularly because of what you do, but also the sort of global aspect as well. What sort of tools and apps do you recommend?
They're kind of all the favorites, really. I'm Dropbox for document sharing. We do use Google Docs if our clients prefer it, but generally that's our favorite.
Yeah.
For Todoist, for list making and tasks and projects, we use Todoist. Yeah. And I think I have tried just about everything over the years. I'm not so much visual, so I do love a list, but I think Todoist there's a lot more to it now. I think they've done a lot more on it, so it appeals to people who are both list makers like me and a bit more visual in terms of being able to share.
Now, can't you, in Todoist? I've tried it for one of my projects just so that I know that it works and what it looks like. But like you, I like List too. I do think we might be twins, actually.
It's really quite nice because I'm sort of, a lot of my team are very visual and make fun of me because I'm not. So it's quite nice. It's quite nice. So yeah, that's kind of what we use for the project-based stuff. We use Toggle because I find it much easier to collect information rather than wait for timesheets from my team.
Yeah.
It's all there right in front of me in terms of, who's been working on what project, which client, and that means that there's less of there's not so much of a lead time in getting invoices out to our clients.
Yeah.
Because I was getting held up. I'd kind of, with a team of 8, I'd get 7 lots of work in, but sometimes they work across clients, so you wouldn't be able to invoice a client until you had everybody's timesheet.
Yeah.
So to save me from A, chasing, and B, moaning, I decided to set up Toggle. And then we use Slack for sort of non-client related communication, but actually I really like Teams, and I find that there's a lot more to Teams in terms of collaboration now than sort of having Skype, because we're sort of Microsoft Office based generally. I'm really enjoying exploring Teams. I think they've got a really great tool there.
Yeah, I read an article the other day. I think it might have been the Zapier article about what you can do on Teams that you can't do on, I think, Zoom they were talking about. But they were saying how much development there has been on that recently, and how, as you say, there's a few more bells and whistles that weren't there before that are making things much better. So
it's great for collaboration and for sort of sharing things like videos, and also working in channels as well. So yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, excellent. So tell us a bit about sort of learning and improving yourself. You talked about your teams getting together to talk about sort of technology changes and so on, and I agree with you. I think people have had more time to change all their interfaces in the last few months.
Definitely.
Facebook particularly. I was just doing some work with one of my students about Facebook advertising, and I'd already lamented the fact that you can get into Facebook ads by about 25 million different routes.
Is that right?
None of which seem to make any sense whatsoever. But so how do you stay sort of abreast of what you need to know, and how do you make sure your team do as well?
I think we're really, really keen on making time for learning. So what we ask is that our team members take 8 hours of learning a month, which sounds like a big chunk, but actually when you break it down, it's not much at all. And that we use LinkedIn Learning a lot because they've got a whole range of online courses. We also encourage people to use webinars. So that can be anything from, I don't know, PowerPoint updates to teaching yourself Canva. Eventbrite changed a whole load of stuff at the beginning of COVID. So we've kind of updated ourselves there. Constant Contact and MailChimp, they made some changes as well. In fact, I mean, it's much more intuitive. So I think all of those that I've mentioned, we've really enjoyed. But there's also things around about engagement, working with teams. So, it's an endless list on LinkedIn. So we choose ourselves, and the great thing as well is that, you can add to your CV. So if you have taken some LinkedIn learning or you've done a course, then you can add it, and it then means that, it's not just one client who benefits. Although we might have done it with one client in mind, all our clients can benefit from us learning.
That's good to hear. So we talked a bit about the sort of concept of outsourcing, delegating, and how people don't always do it, even though they often want to, because they don't really know what to do. And I've talked often on the podcast that even myself, I've outsourced stuff for years. I still procrastinate on doing it at times because it involves me having to work out my process and record a video and send it and all that sort of stuff. And so I found myself procrastinating, and then, months down the line, finally get around to it and then wonder why I didn't do it months ago, sort of scenario. What tips have you got for people who want to bring in a VA or outsource some of what they're doing, and how to sort of get that happening sort of quickly and most effectively?
The tip I would give is that if you can kind of keep an eye on what you're doing, so look at what you're working on and measure it. So either put it in an Excel spreadsheet or use some kind of tracking tool and work out what you're working on at the moment. So that gives you an idea of what you're spending all your time on, and then a better idea of what you can delegate. So it might be a whole task, it might be just traditional PA backup, for example, or it might be something very specific. So for example, you've got a book coming out, but you need artwork, you need somebody to edit it, you want to be in touch with publishers or literary agents. These are all the things that somebody could take off you. And if you've got then an idea of what top 3 things you would find most useful, you can start with all those things, or you can start with one very discrete project. And that also enables you to budget for having a VA, but also to work out the return on your investment. So this is how much you'd pay your VA, but this is what you're going to get back from it. Your book is actually going to be a real thing that comes out in 6 months' time rather than 2 years down the line, for example.
Yeah.
And once you've got an idea, have a conversation with a virtual assistant, work out exactly or sort of what you will do and what they can do. And then it's a question really of giving information. So you can't give too much information. It really helps from a VA's perspective to have all of the info, but also to get a bit of an idea of your culture, and to see how you connect with other people, what your business does, and how you talk to your clients. And then you can sort of start off with something like 10-15 hours a month, as small as that, and then sort of build on it and flex it with a VA as you kind of get underway. And what you've described, Jo, is absolutely typical in terms of, and I'm the same being a business owner as well, is you know that you've got to do it, but the idea of spending all of that time writing notes, being on calls and bringing somebody on board, you feel that you don't have the time to do it.
Yeah.
But as you say, once you've done it, you can't believe you'd not done it years ago.
No, exactly. and it's funny as well, it always almost feels as well that even when you do that doesn't make it any easier the next time.
No, I know. It's I don't know. It's just something that you do, isn't it? It's procrastination, or you put obstacles in your way. But actually, when you sit down and do it, you know what you know. The trouble is, it's all in your head.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's also very helpful is to have a sort of how we do what we do document, some kind of manual. So even if you're not ready to have a VA now, if you start with that, then it's amazing. That's when you see how much work you do.
Yes.
Because and how much experience and knowledge you have.
Yeah, I think as well when that comes in useful is I've mentioned to you I've had a couple of VAs I've worked with for years, and just occasionally one of them's ill, or I don't know, they've both had babies. How dare they?
They have a life.
And they've not worked for a period of time or whatever. And I suddenly end up with a task that I have no idea how they do it anymore, because I delegated it so long ago that I don't know what the process is. But fortunately, I do, because I don't do visual, I do written processes as well as record the video, and so luckily I've been able to go back to my written process and follow it myself.
Well, that's brilliant.
But
it also it means that if you've got that document and you're sharing it, that they, as things change, they can update it so that everybody is in the loop. And that's why we have a backup VA, because rather than, we don't take on a client and say, if your VA is sick or has a baby or goes on holiday, it could be any one of 8 people. It's going to be the same second person, and it's the first VA's. It's for her to delegate to the second and update them. Yes,
yeah. So I asked you to let me know any questions that you particularly wanted me to ask before we started, and one of them was about what are the biggest time savers. That sounds like some top tips.
The biggest time savers, I would say, are holding a weekly meeting. It doesn't sound like it, but if we can talk to our clients and between our team on a weekly basis, sometimes it's only 5 or 10 minutes, but it just means that everybody is up to date and that they've got the tools and information they need, and they can share best practice. And what we also do is then make sure that we update each other with what's going on. So we might do that with a Dropbox folder and say, I have done this, or we might use a Todoist, so that people are clear on who's doing what, who's responsible, and to know that things are done. So you've got it in writing, and we confirm everything, because as you say, you might want to go through something 6 months, or even in my case, sometimes 6 years down the line, and think, what did we do, or why did we do it? I think it's really communicating on a regular basis. Although we work virtually, there is really no substitute for talking to each other. And I think just making sure that everybody is working as a team. And I think in terms of sort of top tips is also making people feel that they are very much part of a team. I think when you work remotely, you can feel isolated. So we do socials as well. We've got all sorts of stuff going on online at the moment in terms of arts and crafts, various other fun drinks, cocktails, and whatever else, which has been all the way through, because some of our team work on their own, so they don't see anyone all day. And I think it's really important to have your network to support you as well.
Yeah, definitely. So last couple of questions. Firstly, what about those days where it all goes horribly wrong? How do you deal with those?
When it all goes horribly wrong, I sit down. I think for me, I'm such a list maker. It's really about what's gone wrong and why, but more importantly, what are we going to do about it? And we're going to do it quick. So if something has gone wrong, first thing is, and I think it's even written into our contracts, that you've got to tell somebody immediately that it's happened, and then provide them with a solution. So this has gone wrong. It's not finger pointing, it's not blaming. So I think you've got to allow people to feel that they can make mistakes. Of course, we don't want to, but things do occasionally happen. It's life, and it's the more people involved in something, the more likely it is to happen. So it's really about being clear, and then learning lessons from it, and being honest as well, not trying to fudge it, but to say, hold your hands up and say it was my mistake, or it wasn't. I mean, sometimes occasionally you get people who try to say, that it was the fault at our end or our client's end. So you also got to give people the opportunity to speak up, and it's not always easy in a support role. It's sort of, sometimes people come from very hierarchical backgrounds, so when it does all go wrong, in a nutshell, it's about rectifying it as quickly as possible and learning from it so that it doesn't happen again. And we work on a lot of check sheets, tick lists, and work our way through those, particularly when we've got events or we're traveling, so that we can see again that everything's been done and nothing left off.
Yes, yeah. Lovely, thank you. And then the last one is that bit about living more, and that's where I talk about getting to do more of the things that you want to do and less of the stuff that you don't want to do. What do those days where you've lived more look like for you?
They will generally look like me being out in nature, and I noticed that Heather Waring, who runs 1 Million Women Walking, had been a podcast guest in the past.
Yes.
So through Heather, I've kind of upped my walking a lot, particularly during COVID. I'm planning to do a Camino when we can, probably next year. And making sure again that the team take time out to do what they want to do. So it does give people flexibility. If somebody wants to go and do a class in the middle of the day, we talk to each other. We know that they're out for an hour and a half, and we'll be sure to cover. And to make sure really that you've got the life you want. For me, my big thing has been travel. So I really, I make sure at the beginning of a year that I put in the travel that I want to do. I can work from anywhere, but if it's holiday, then it's in there and it's sacred, because I find if you don't do it, then your diary for the year pretty much fills up, and then you're trying to squeeze bits and pieces in.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, that sort of intentionality.
Yes.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Susan. It's been really interesting talking to you today. Tell people how they can find out more about you and get in touch.
They can look at the website, which is more-business.com, MOORE, my surname, or on Twitter at moreVA.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jo. It's been a pleasure.
All this information is available in the show notes. If you go to powertolivemore.com / in this case 191, then you'll find them there. And this week I want to talk to you about the end of my review of 2020 inspiring me for 2021. If you were listening last week, you'll remember that I talked about what I did in 2020. I've written a rather self-indulgent, rather long blog post about it, and I talked through the first sort of section of that, and then said that this week I talk about my 5 fundamentals, which are what I use for my work with myself and with my clients, and I reflected on the year in relation to those fundamentals, and I'm going to talk about those now. So the first fundamental is about self-care, and it wasn't always the first one, but I decided in 2020 that it's actually vital to focus on self-care first before we start to think of the other fundamentals, because we really need it for sort of energy and resilience more than ever, given what's going on around us. And what it meant for me in 2020 was firstly that we really hunkered down as a family in lockdown as soon as we knew it was coming, and bearing in mind that we live next door to my mother-in-law in her 70s, we made a big effort to ensure that we stayed in, and that we made it as enjoyable as possible for us in the circumstances that we found ourselves in. So one of the things that we set up immediately was a daily aperitif before dinner, to get together, have a drink and some nibbles, a chat, and maybe a board game before we had dinner. It's something that we do quite regularly as a family because we've got French family and French friends, but we really sort of decided we were going to do that every day of lockdown, so that we could really sort of build in that sort of anchor for the family. And it really was something that helped us and is still helping us, as obviously we're in lockdown again now. The second S is about simplify. And I think what's happened in 2020 for me was an opportunity really to get back to basics on what I do, whether that be in my personal life at home, but also in my business. I got really clear on what I want to do and how I want to do it, which is something I talk about all the time, but I don't always have time to really sort of carve out that time to think about it. And so to give an example of that, I picked up some coaching at the beginning of lockdown which was great because it replaced some of the corporate work that went away. But I was finding that I'd got sort of calls throughout the week at all different times, and it was really breaking up the days. And I really like to have an empty diary randomly. And you don't earn so much money if you're doing coaching if you have an empty diary, but I like to have sort of chunks of time to get things done in the way that I want to do them. And when I started the coaching, that wasn't happening. So what I did when I realised that there was a problem was to really simplify how I deliver what I do. And actually that meant for me doing my coaching on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays in the afternoon, so that it really sort of corralled all the work into those 3 days and gave me big chunks of time on Monday and Friday to do some of the project work that I need to work on. And so that was a really great opportunity or great example rather of me simplifying by looking at what I want to do, looking at how I can do more of what I want to do and how I can do less of the stuff that I don't want to do, and how to make that happen by changing what I was doing. The third S is about systemize. And as I said already, I sort of went back to basics in 2020. Processes are really important to me in my business, and being tidy and organised is really important. But, we get really busy and things get out of hand. I always liken the sort of systemising and then sort of decluttering thing that I do on a regular basis to the fact that, we often do that with our bedroom or our kitchen or whatever. We get really clean and tidy and put everything away and organised and so on. And then gradually over the next however long, things get out of hand again. And that happens on your computer, it happens in your processes, in your business, it happens in even things like how you spend your time and what you're delivering. So having some time and focus on getting back to basics and really streamlining processes was really key last year for me. The next S is about sharing. The next fundamental is about sharing. And that for me in my business is mostly about outsourcing. And I do a lot of outsourcing already. I have 3 VAs that I work with different tasks and focus. But this year I outsourced a lot of my podcast admin, which I'd been sort of hanging on to, not knowing whether I could find somebody to do that for me, and if I was able to sort of hand it over, trust somebody enough to hand it over. But actually my VA that I've worked with the longest is really keen to pick up new skills and really reliable, all that sort of stuff. And I basically asked her if she fancied editing my podcast and picking up the sort of end of the process, and she said she was up for giving it a try. So I taught her what I needed to do, and it really helped, including the fact that I have to record these outros on a Wednesday night, because if I don't, she can't do the work on the Thursday to enable us to publish the podcast on a Friday. So I sort of inadvertently created an absolute definite deadline for myself for the outros. In the past, I used to record them when I could, or where I felt up to it, when I got inspired or whatever, and that sometimes meant that the podcast would go out on a Saturday or maybe even a Sunday. And now it goes out religiously every Friday morning because I'm having to hit the deadline with the outro on a Wednesday. So there were so many advantages to outsourcing that, and it sort of spurred me on to get on and outsource some more of the things that I could outsource but hadn't got round to doing. And if you've not outsourced yourself yet, lots of people hear about the benefits of it and get sort of quite interested and excited about the idea, but then don't take the next step. I've certainly spoken to many people over the years and recommended outsourcing, and then, not seen any action in terms of that coming from them. And I think, firstly, it's about finding the right people and finding people with the right skills and people that you can trust and that you can afford, I guess. But actually, what it's then about is making sure that you've got the best processes, streamlined processes that you can then teach to somebody else by way of a video or, sort of standard operating procedure manual or whatever for the business. And that's often the bit that gets in the way. I've talked about this before, the fact that it takes effort and time to create those instructions in order to get the stuff done. And actually, once you've done it, you get, all that extra time back and that peace of mind, and you wonder why you didn't do it sooner. But of course you didn't do it sooner because it's quite sort of laborious to do it in the first place. But if you're thinking about outsourcing, if you're teetering on the brink of outsourcing, I'd really recommend looking at that as soon as you can. And you don't have to do everything. You can just start with one small task and build up from there as you get more used to working with your VA and you've got your process in place to outsource in the right sort of way. So that is my share fundamental. And then the final fundamental, which wasn't always on the list, they used to only be 4. And going back to the decluttering thing, I realised that actually, in that whole process of simplifying and decluttering and then things getting out of hand again, you need to have something that keeps you moving forward, keeps you improving, keeping these systems and processes running smoothly. And sustain was the fundamental that came out of that. And so that's about routines and rituals and personal development and what you can do in order to maintain and keep things moving forwards and keep improving, getting better, doing things better on a regular basis moving forward. So what I've done this year with Sustain for me and my business was I rebuilt my regular business reading routine. I've talked about doing business reading whilst I'm drinking my coffee in the morning, and I've created a ritual out of that. I had sort of dropped that a bit during lockdown, but I've sort of resurrected it now. The other routine that went away was listening to podcasts. I used to listen to them when I was walking and driving, but I've done far less of both of those things since lockdown because we didn't go out for 3 months right at the beginning. So walking, apart from on the treadmill, wasn't really an option, and on the treadmill I like to watch things because it's too boring otherwise, so I'd stopped listening to podcasts. So I've started trying to build that back in and create opportunities to go walking now that we do go out, so that I can listen to more of those podcasts because they're so valuable in terms of learning, finding resources, finding new podcasts to listen to, finding podcasts to guest on, finding guests to come on my podcast and so on. So I'm trying to sort of build that in again. Those are my 5 fundamentals and how I've sort of used them this year for myself within the business. And as I said, I work with my clients and my members of Power to Live More Calm around those 5 fundamentals so that people who are using them get the chance to have, the business that they want, but also to live more. And as you know from the podcast, that's where I say that you get to do more of the things that you want to do and less of the stuff that you don't want to do. So those are my 5 fundamentals. Hope you found that useful. Have a think about your own life and those 5 fundamentals and how they apply to you and your business. If you're interested in looking at more detail on those, then you can go to my website, powertolivemore.com, and download my 5 fundamentals checklist, which will take you through each of those 5 and get you thinking about how they work within your business and your life. And just to finish, I'd just like to say hello and welcome to a number of new listeners. I was really excited to see that my listener numbers had gone up quite considerably last week, and I didn't actually know why. I mentioned last week that I'm a finalist in the Podcasting for Business Awards, but I didn't think that would have had much of an impact at the moment, and certainly not that much of an impact. So I didn't really know what was going on. And then I got an email from Psychologies magazine to say that they'd published my podcast in the magazine, and I'm a reader of the magazine, and I'd emailed them actually because they were asking about podcasts before Christmas and sort of forgotten about it and hadn't actually got that far through the magazine this month, so I hadn't got to the podcasting section. So it was a real surprise to get the email, and obviously I hurried off to look at the magazine and read the little bit, and I assume that that's why the numbers have gone up. And so if you're listening to this because you've read about the podcast in the magazine, then welcome. Really hope that you subscribe so that you continue to listen to the shows. We're up to show 191, as I've said already. Obviously there's tons of shows that you can go back to if you're enjoying them and you want to find some more to listen to. So I would encourage you. And if you're listening to a few but obviously haven't got time to listen to all of them, and you want a bit of entertainment, some of the first few, perhaps the first 10, are quite funny if you listen to them, because my daughter, as you know, does the intro, and at that stage she was about 8 and very earnest and tried her hardest to do those intros. So I do every so often go back and listen to them because they are quite funny. So welcome, and hope to speak to you in future weeks. And just to remind you that the show notes of this week's show are at powertolivemore.com/191, and we look forward to speaking to you next week.
Use your power to live more.